In a world filled with historical figures and spiritual leaders, few lives have left an impact as deep and enduring as that of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His story is not just one of religious significance, but of human resilience, moral excellence, and unwavering commitment to truth. Before he ever received divine revelation, before he stood before crowds calling for justice and monotheism, Muhammad was a child born into the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, in a society that was complex, tribal, and often brutal. His journey from a humble orphan in Mecca to the final prophet of Islam is one of the most powerful narratives in human history, and understanding it begins not with the moment he received the first verse of the Quran, but with the world he was born into and the man he became before his mission began. This story matters now more than ever. In a time where misinformation spreads quickly and judgments are made hastily, learning the full, authentic life of Prophet Muhammad provides clarity and context. It allows us to see him not only as a messenger of God, but as a son, a husband, a friend, and a man deeply concerned with the suffering around him. His early life reveals so much about his character. The patience he would later show in the face of fierce opposition was forged during years of hardship. The compassion he displayed as a leader was rooted in the pain of loss and the depth of empathy he cultivated as a young man who experienced the harshest realities of life. This script tells the story of the Prophet's life from birth to the moment of his first revelation at the age of 40. It covers the events, people, and values that shaped him long before he stood on Mount Safa to call his people to Islam. It invites the listener to walk beside him through the valleys of Mecca, to witness the quiet moments of contemplation in the cave of Hira, and to understand the extraordinary soul behind the message that would change the world. This is the story of Muhammad, peace be upon him, in full, told with care, respect, and a deep desire to present the truth of his early life with both accuracy and heart. Long before the first verses of the Quran were revealed, Arabia was a land defined by extremes. Harsh deserts stretched endlessly under a blazing sun, while scattered oases offered pockets of life and trade. The people who inhabited this vast region lived in tightly knit tribal societies, each bound by codes of loyalty, honor, and survival. There was no single government or central authority. Instead, each tribe was a law unto itself, and survival often depended on alliances, strength in numbers, and an unwavering sense of tribal identity. Injustice, retaliation, and vendettas were common, and blood feuds could continue for generations over a single insult or offense. Honor was everything, and weakness was seen as a danger to one's family and lineage. In the western part of the Arabian Peninsula stood the city of Mecca, nestled among rocky hills and barren valleys. Though physically isolated, Mecca was a hub of activity. Caravans passed through regularly, connecting the city to greater trade routes reaching Syria, Yemen, Persia, and beyond. Merchants sold spices, leather, incense, and cloth, making Mecca economically significant. At the heart of the city stood the Kaaba, a cube-shaped structure believed to have been built by the Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ishmael. Over time, the Kaaba had become a sanctuary filled with idols representing the many gods of the various Arab tribes. Although Ibrahim's message of monotheism had once defined the Kaaba, that original faith had long been overshadowed by centuries of idol worship. The Quraysh tribe, who traced their lineage back to Ismail, controlled Mecca and the Kaaba. They were respected and influential, serving as custodians of the shrine and organizers of the annual pilgrimage. This role granted them both religious prestige and economic power. Wealth accumulated among the elite, while the poor and vulnerable remained neglected. Mecca had grown prosperous, but its spiritual core had eroded. Materialism flourished. Idolatry, superstition, and exploitation were widespread. The poor were often ignored, or worse, abused. Slavery was commonplace. Women had little to no rights, and infant daughters were sometimes buried alive out of shame. Mercy and compassion were rare in public life, and ethical behavior was generally determined by what served a tribe's interests. Despite this grim moral picture, there were glimmers of light. Some individuals, known as the Hunafa, rejected the polytheism around them, and quietly searched for the truth. They believed in one God and felt deeply troubled by the way society had strayed from righteousness. Though they were few in number, their presence revealed a deeper undercurrent within Arabian society, a yearning for meaning beyond wealth, power, and tribal loyalty. Among the Jews and Christians living in small communities scattered across the peninsula, there remained a belief that a prophet would soon come, someone who would bring justice and reawaken the true faith of Ibrahim. Culturally, the Arabs prided themselves on poetry, memory, and language. Poets were considered the voice of a tribe, capable of preserving history, praising heroes, and destroying enemies with a single well-crafted verse. Oral tradition was the main means of preserving knowledge. This linguistic culture made the Arabs highly expressive and deeply sensitive to the power of words. It also meant that when the Quran would later be revealed, its unmatched eloquence would strike the people with awe, even before they fully grasped its divine message. Arabia before Islam was not entirely devoid of good, but it was a place in desperate need of transformation. The people valued loyalty and courage, but these virtues were often distorted by pride, vengeance, and a hunger for dominance. Spiritual truths had been buried under centuries of cultural drift and religious corruption. Mecca, though central to religious rituals, had become a place of economic ambition and spiritual blindness. Yet it was here, in this very city, that a child would be born into the tribe of Quraysh. Unknown to the people around him, he would grow to become the one who would change everything, not by the sword, nor by wealth, but by truth, humility, and a message that would echo across the world for centuries to come. Arabia was waiting for a light to break through its darkness. The time was drawing near. In the year 570 of the Common Era, a child was born in the city of Mecca, a child whose arrival would one day alter the course of history. This year became known among the Arabs as the Year of the Elephant, named after a dramatic event in which a foreign army led by a ruler named Abraha marched toward Mecca intending to destroy the Kaaba. Abraha brought with him elephants, creatures never before seen by the people of Arabia, but before he could reach the holy site, his army was struck by a sudden and mysterious destruction. The Meccans saw this as a divine act of protection over the Kaaba. It was within this momentous year that Amina, a noble woman of the Quraysh tribe, gave birth to her only child, Muhammad. Muhammad was born into the clan of Banu Hashim, a respected branch of the powerful Quraysh tribe. His father, Abdullah, had passed away even before Muhammad was born. He had fallen ill while returning from a trade journey and died in Yathrib, the city that would later become known as Medina. This left Amina a widow and Muhammad an orphan from the very beginning of his life. Though he entered the world without the presence of his father, Muhammad was surrounded by a family that cherished him. His grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, was the leader of the clan and a man of dignity and influence in Mecca. He took a special interest in his newborn grandson, sensing that this child was destined for something great. As was customary among noble families in Mecca, Muhammad was sent to live with a Bedouin tribe in the desert during his early years. It was believed that desert life offered a healthier environment and a purer form of the Arabic language. He was placed in the care of Halima Sadiya, a woman of the Banu Sa'd tribe. From the moment Muhammad entered her household, Halima noticed that her fortunes began to change. Her animals became healthier, her provisions increased, and her home was filled with unexpected blessings. She came to love him deeply, and Muhammad spent several formative years under her care, growing in strength, beauty, and gentleness. One day, while playing with other children, an unusual event occurred. Muhammad was approached by two figures who laid him down and appeared to open his chest. They removed something dark from within and washed his heart in a vessel of light. The other children ran in fear, and Halima, alarmed, returned him to his mother in Mecca. Though the event was mysterious, it left no physical harm, and Muhammad returned to his normal life, marked now by a quiet seriousness that was noticed even in his youth. At the age of 6, tragedy struck again. His mother, Amina, took him on a journey to Yathrib to visit the grave of his father, and to connect him with his extended family. On the way back to Mecca, Amina fell ill and died in a village called Abwa, leaving Muhammad once more in a state of loss. Alone in the world but for his caretakers, he was taken back to Mecca by a family servant named Baraka, also known as Ayman, a woman who would remain loyal to him for the rest of her life. Now an orphan twice over, Muhammad was placed under the guardianship of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. The old man loved the boy dearly and treated him with honor, even allowing him to sit beside him at gatherings, something few children were permitted to do. People began to notice that Muhammad carried himself with an unusual grace and dignity for someone so young. He spoke with care, listened attentively, and never indulged in foolishness. Just 2 years later, Abdul Muttalib also passed away, and guardianship of Muhammad passed to his uncle, Abu Talib, a merchant of modest means but a man known for his kindness and generosity. Abu Talib treated Muhammad like one of his own sons, shielding him from harm and teaching him the ways of trade and travel. Throughout these early years, Muhammad experienced more loss and hardship than most children could bear, yet these trials shaped his heart into one of extraordinary compassion. He saw life from the margins, not as one born into luxury or power, but as someone who had known hunger, grief, and the fragility of life. This early exposure to suffering gave him a deep empathy for the poor, the orphaned, and the vulnerable, which would later define his mission. As he grew into adolescence, Muhammad stood out among his peers not for his wealth or status, but for his character. He was gentle but strong, quiet but wise, and even in his youth, he held a presence that others respected. His early life was marked by pain, but also by resilience. He was a boy shaped by love, loss, and the quiet strength of those who raised him. And though he did not yet know it, the foundations of a remarkable life were already being laid. As Muhammad entered his youth, the city of Mecca bustled with energy. It was a place where tribes converged, where merchants traded their goods, and where poets competed with words that could elevate or disgrace an entire lineage. Among all this movement and noise, the young Muhammad stood out not for his wealth or status, but for something far more enduring: his character. He had grown up without the protection of parents, moving from the care of his grandfather to his uncle, and yet he carried no bitterness in his heart. Those who knew him remarked on his calm demeanor and his remarkable sense of integrity. Even as a boy, he was known to speak only when he had something meaningful to say. People listened when he talked, not because he demanded attention, but because he offered sincerity in a world that had little of it. In a society built on tribal loyalty and fierce competition, Muhammad earned a reputation for being fair, honest, and deeply trustworthy. He worked in various small trades and jobs to help support his uncle's household, including tending sheep in the hills around Mecca. This seemingly simple task proved to be an important part of his development. Shepherding taught patience, awareness, solitude, and responsibility. It gave him time to think, to reflect, and to understand the quiet rhythms of nature, all of which would shape his reflective personality and deep empathy. So, as he grew older, Muhammad began to accompany his uncle Abu Talib on trade journeys across the Arabian Peninsula. These trips exposed him to the larger world beyond Mecca. He saw the cities of Syria and observed the people of different faiths and cultures. He learned how to negotiate, how to speak with humility, and how to judge people's character through action rather than appearance. He dealt with merchants and customers who were often ruthless or deceptive, but he never adopted their habits. He became known among the traders as Al-Amin, the trustworthy one. In a city where profit was often valued more than principle, Muhammad's honesty stood out like a light in the dark. Though he had every opportunity to indulge in the entertainment and indulgences common to Meccan youth, Muhammad was never drawn to excess. He avoided the drinking, gambling, and idol worship that were prevalent at the time. He was not aloof or judgmental, but he maintained a quiet distance from practices he felt were empty. This restraint was not something forced on him by others. It came from within. He had an inner compass, one that seemed to guide him even before he received any divine revelation. He valued justice and compassion, and his actions reflected a deep sense of accountability. He never harmed others for gain, nor did he allow others to suffer without offering help if he could provide it. When conflicts arose between tribes or families, Muhammad was often chosen to mediate. Even in his youth, people trusted his judgment. One story from his early adulthood illustrates this trust clearly. The Quraysh were rebuilding the Kaaba, and when it came time to place the sacred black stone into its position, a dispute broke out among the tribal leaders about who should have the honor. The tension threatened to turn violent, but when Muhammad arrived at the scene, they quickly agreed to let him decide. He asked for a cloth, placed the black stone in the center, and invited a representative from each tribe to lift the cloth together. Once the stone reached its proper height, he set it in place with his own hands. His wisdom and sense of fairness calmed the situation and earned even greater respect from his people. At the same time, Muhammad never used his growing reputation for personal advantage. He remained humble, living simply and helping his uncle and others without complaint. He never looked down on the poor, nor did he flatter the rich. He observed the inequalities around him: orphans neglected, women abused, slaves beaten, the poor humiliated, and he felt the weight of injustice press upon his heart. Though he had not yet spoken publicly about any grand mission, those who knew him could sense that he was unlike anyone else they had met. Muhammad also took part in an early pledge known as Hilf al-Fudul, an alliance formed by a group of Meccans to protect the rights of the oppressed and ensure fair treatment in commercial dealings. This agreement deeply resonated with him, and years later, even after receiving revelation, he would reflect on it with pride. It was one of the few social institutions of pre-Islamic Mecca that aligned with his values. By the time he reached his mid-20s, Muhammad was already seen as a man of distinction. He was not wealthy, nor was he seeking fame. But his integrity, his quiet strength, and his unwavering honesty earned him the respect of both the elders and the youth. His early life had been marked by grief, but those experiences had softened his heart rather than hardened it. He had every reason to become bitter, but instead, he became compassionate. He had every excuse to follow the crowd, but instead, he listened to something deeper. In a society struggling to hold on to any sense of moral grounding, Muhammad stood firm. Even before his first revelation, he had already become a man who changed the lives of those around him simply by the way he lived. By the time Muhammad had reached the age of 25, his reputation for honesty and reliability had spread far beyond his own clan. He had earned the trust of merchants, neighbors, and elders alike, and his name carried weight in the marketplaces of Mecca. It was during this period that his life would take another meaningful turn, one that would not only bring him emotional stability but would also shape the course of his future mission. The change came through a woman named Khadijah bint Khuwaylid. Khadijah was a wealthy and successful merchant, widely respected for both her business acumen and her noble character. Though she had been widowed twice, she maintained control over her trade caravans and dealt directly with the leading figures of Mecca. She was known for her intelligence and her fairness, qualities that made her stand out in a male-dominated society. Despite her status and wealth, Khadijah remained grounded, generous to the poor, and mindful of justice in her dealings. When she heard of Muhammad's reputation as an honest and skilled trader, she saw in him someone who could be trusted with her business. She offered him a position as the head of a trade caravan to Syria, a role that involved both negotiation and leadership. Muhammad accepted the offer and traveled north, accompanied by Khadijah's servant, Maysara. During the journey, Muhammad conducted his affairs with such integrity and wisdom that the trade yielded more profit than expected. Maysara, who observed Muhammad closely, was deeply impressed by his conduct. He noted not only his professionalism, but also his calm temperament, his kindness to those around him, and his ability to win respect without force or arrogance. When Muhammad and Maysara returned to Mecca, Maysara relayed his impressions to Khadijah. Already inclined to think highly of Muhammad, she now felt a growing admiration. She had seen many men come and go in her life, but none had shown the balance of humility and strength that Muhammad embodied. After some reflection, she decided to propose marriage through public fanfare, but through a quiet message delivered by a trusted friend. Muhammad consulted with his uncle Abu Talib and agreed. The proposal was accepted with joy, and a simple ceremony was held. At the time of their marriage, Khadijah was around 40 years old, and Muhammad was 25. Despite the age difference, their union became a model of mutual love, respect, and loyalty. Their home was filled with peace and trust, and for the first time since childhood, Muhammad had a stable and comforting place to call his own. Khadijah proved to be more than just a supportive spouse. She was Muhammad's confidant, his advisor, and his greatest source of comfort. In a world where women were often denied rights and recognition, she stood beside him as an equal partner. Her wisdom and emotional strength gave Muhammad a safe space to think, reflect, and grow. She did not pressure him to conform to the ways of Meccan society. Instead, she supported his inward search for meaning and his growing discomfort with the idolatry and injustice around them. Together, they raised a family, including several children. While not all of them survived into adulthood, their youngest daughter, Fatima, would later become one of the most beloved figures in Islamic history. Their household was not defined by wealth or luxury, though Khadijah's resources allowed them comfort. What set their family apart was the sense of purpose and sincerity that filled their daily life. Muhammad continued to work and engage with society, but more and more, he began to withdraw from the noise of the city, seeking solitude and reflection. Khadijah noticed these changes and understood them. She never discouraged his retreats into the mountains, nor did she question the long hours he spent in silence. Instead, she supported him with patience and love, providing both space and reassurance. In doing so, she laid the emotional foundation for the extraordinary journey that was about to begin. The marriage between Muhammad and Khadijah was more than a personal blessing. It was the union of two souls prepared for a mission far greater than either of them could fully imagine at the time. Long before revelation came, Khadijah nurtured the heart of the man who would one day carry a message to all of humanity. Her unwavering belief in his goodness became a mirror in which Muhammad could see his own strength. In a world full of uncertainty and moral confusion, their marriage stood as a quiet, powerful testimony to the strength of love built on character, trust, and shared purpose. As the years passed and Muhammad entered his 30s, the restlessness in his heart began to grow. Although he had a stable life, a loving wife, and the respect of his community, something within him remained unsettled. Mecca was thriving as a commercial center, but its spiritual state troubled him deeply. He walked through the markets and streets and saw how greed had replaced generosity, how the strong preyed upon the weak, and how the sacred Kaaba, once a symbol of the pure worship of one God, had become surrounded by idols carved from wood and stone. His soul could not find peace among the noise, the injustice, and the falsehoods that had taken root in the hearts of his people. Muhammad had always been sensitive to the world around him, but now his observations became more intense. He saw the cruelty shown to slaves, the neglect of orphans, and the mistreatment of women. He witnessed the powerful using their status to exploit the poor, and he saw that worship had become an empty ritual meant to serve the pride and profit of the Quraysh elite. People honored the idols with offerings, but they did not honor truth, compassion, or humility. The religion of their ancestors had become a hollow tradition, stripped of meaning. These realities pressed heavily on Muhammad's heart, and he longed for clarity, for truth, and for connection with something higher than the world of trade and tribal rivalry. Increasingly, he began to withdraw from society. He would leave the noise of the city and climb into the hills that surrounded Mecca. His favorite place was a small cave in the mountain called Hira, a quiet refuge far from the eyes and expectations of others. There, in solitude, he would sit for hours, sometimes for days, contemplating the meaning of life and the nature of existence. He did not bring books or scrolls, for he could not read or write. He brought only his thoughts, his questions, and a heart that sought answers with sincerity. During these periods of retreat, Muhammad fasted and prayed in his own way. He would look at the stars above him, the silence of the desert stretching beyond the horizon, and he would feel the presence of a power far greater than any idol. In those moments, He did not have names or rituals to describe what he felt, but he knew with certainty that the Creator of all things was near. This quiet search became a defining rhythm of his life. Even though the people of Mecca went about their business unaware, something was unfolding in the silence of that cave. Khadijah, ever perceptive, noticed these changes. She did not resist them, nor did she question his growing desire for seclusion. She supported him with patience, preparing his food and allowing him the space he needed. She understood that his journey inward was not a sign of sadness or dissatisfaction with her, but a calling that he himself could not yet explain. Her trust gave him peace of mind as he returned again and again to the cave of Hira, seeking something he could not name but could no longer ignore. As his 40th year approached, Muhammad's experience of the world began to shift in more mysterious ways. He would later describe how his dreams became vivid and meaningful, like dawn breaking through darkness. Everything he saw in these dreams came true as if reality was unfolding in advance. These visions confirmed that something profound was coming. Though he told no one outside his home, he sensed that he stood at the edge of a great transformation. He had no desire for power, no ambition to become a leader, and no expectation of being chosen for any special task. Yet his heart was being prepared for something far beyond human imagination. It was during one of these long nights in the cave, in the stillness of Hira, that everything changed. But before the angel appeared, before the first verse was revealed, there was the silence, the waiting, and the longing. There was the man sitting alone in the dark, not seeking fame, not seeking control, but seeking truth. This search, carried out over many years with honesty and humility, would become the foundation of a mission that would reach every corner of the earth. The story of Revelation does not begin with a sudden flash of light. It begins with a heart that could no longer accept falsehood, a mind that refused to be distracted by wealth or custom, and a soul that yearned for meaning. Muhammad's search for truth was not dramatic or loud. It was steady, sincere, and guided by a sense that the answers were not to be found in the world around him, but in the voice that had yet to speak from beyond the veil of creation. That voice was near, and soon it would call his name. One night, in the quiet of the cave of Hira, during the sacred month of Ramadan, something extraordinary took place. The world outside was still and silent, but within the cave, an unseen presence filled the air. Muhammad sat in meditation as he often did, reflecting on the state of his people, the injustice he saw in Mecca, and the aching longing in his heart for truth and guidance. He had come here many times seeking peace, but on this night, what he found would change his life and the course of human history. Suddenly, a figure appeared before him, unlike anything he had ever seen. The presence was overwhelming, neither human nor like any creature he knew. It was the angel Jibril, the messenger of God. Without warning, the angel spoke a single word in a commanding and thunderous voice. "Read." Muhammad, startled and confused, replied that he could not read. The angel embraced him tightly, as if trying to pour something into his being, then released him and repeated the command. Again, Muhammad responded that he could not read. A third time, the angel held him firmly, then let him go and said, "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not." These were the first verses of what would become the Quran, the final revelation to humanity. The words struck Muhammad with a power he had never experienced. He was not merely hearing something, he was being transformed by it. The verses entered his heart and settled in his soul, undeniable and filled with truth. He had not expected this, he had not asked for it. Yet now it was clear that he had been chosen for something far greater than himself. Terrified and shaken, Muhammad left the cave and hurried down the mountain. The experience had left him trembling, unsure of what had just happened to him. His heart pounded with fear and awe. As he made his way home to Khadijah, he felt the world had shifted around him, though no one else knew it yet. When he reached his house, he called out to his wife and asked her to cover him. Khadijah wrapped him in a cloak and sat beside him as he tried to find the words to explain what he had seen. He told her everything, from the sudden appearance of the angel to the words that had been spoken. He confessed his fear that something might have gone wrong within him, that perhaps he had lost his mind or been overcome by some unknown force. But Khadijah listened with calm and confidence. She did not doubt him. She did not panic. With unwavering certainty, she told him that God would never disgrace him. She reminded him of who he was, a man who cared for the orphan, fed the poor, supported the weak, and always spoke the truth. She said that someone like him could never be deceived or misled. She believed, before anyone else, that what had come to him was real and from the heavens. Wanting to understand more, Khadijah took him to see her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, a learned man who had embraced the message of previous prophets and studied the scriptures of the Jews and Christians. When Muhammad described the figure he had seen and the words he had heard, Waraka's eyes filled with tears. He confirmed that what had come to Muhammad was the same divine message that had been given to Moses. He told him that he had been chosen as a prophet and that his people would eventually reject him. He warned that the path ahead would be difficult and filled with opposition, but that it was a path of truth. Waraka wished he could live long enough to support Muhammad when that day of hardship would arrive. In the days that followed, the revelation paused. The sky was silent. The angel did not return. This period, though brief, was heavy with uncertainty. Muhammad wondered if something had gone wrong or if he had somehow failed. The quiet tested his heart, yet it also gave him time to reflect on what had happened. And then, just as suddenly as before, the angel returned, not in a cave but in the open sky, stretching across the horizon. Jibril appeared again, majestic and unmistakable, and reassured Muhammad that he had not been abandoned. More verses followed, calling him to rise and deliver the message, to warn his people, and to purify his heart. These early moments of revelation were intense and consuming. They affected Muhammad physically and emotionally. Sometimes he would break into a sweat, even on cold days. Other times he would feel a great weight descend upon him. The revelation was not like hearing a story. It was an experience that passed through every part of him. Each word was memorized instantly, without effort, as if his heart had been opened and filled by the voice of heaven itself. He did not rush out to declare his prophethood in the streets. Instead, he began quietly, sharing the message with those closest to him. Khadijah was the first to believe. Then came Ali, the young cousin who lived in their home. Then Zayd, a servant who loved Muhammad like a son, and Abu Bakr, his close friend. These early believers accepted the truth not because of pressure or spectacle, but because they knew the man who brought it. They knew he had never lied, never cheated, and never sought fame. And now he was telling them that God had spoken to him. The first revelation was not simply the beginning of a new chapter. It was the opening of a door that had been closed for centuries. It was the return of divine guidance to a world that had long wandered in the dark. For Muhammad, it was the moment his inner search found its answer. For the world, it was the beginning of a message that would echo through time, calling people to remember their Creator and to live with justice, mercy, and truth. After the first revelation, Muhammad began to understand the weight of the mission that had been placed upon him. He was no longer only a husband, a father, and a merchant. He was now the chosen messenger of God, tasked with delivering a message that would challenge not only the beliefs of his people, but also the foundations of their society. The early days of his mission were marked by caution, patience, and quiet determination. He did not rush into public proclamations or seek to confront the Quraysh immediately. Instead, he began with those closest to him, inviting them gently and privately to the truth he had received. The first people to embrace Islam were the ones who knew Muhammad most intimately. Khadijah, his wife, was the first to believe in him and remained his strongest support through every trial. Ali ibn Abi Talib, his young cousin who had been raised in his home, accepted the message without hesitation, even though he was still a boy. Zayd ibn Haritha, who had once been a slave and had come to love Muhammad as his own father, also accepted the message without question. Then came Abu Bakr ibn Abi Quhafa, one of Muhammad's closest friends and a man known for his wisdom and calm nature. Through Abu Bakr's influence, others slowly came to the faith, including people of various backgrounds, from respected merchants to freed slaves. In these early days, the message was shared quietly and carefully. The believers would gather in secret, sometimes in Muhammad's home, other times in the house of a companion named Al-Arqam. These meetings were small and discreet. They would pray together, reflect on the words of the Quran, and support one another through the uncertainties of what lay ahead. The message was simple yet powerful. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. This truth called for the rejection of idols and the embracing of justice, mercy, and the worship of a single creator. Even in these early moments, the message began to disturb the established order in Mecca. The Quraysh were deeply invested in the system of idol worship. The Kaaba, though once a house of monotheism, had become a center of commerce tied to the many idols housed there. Tribes from all over Arabia would come to visit their gods, offering wealth and tribute to the custodians of the sanctuary. The Quraysh feared that a message calling for the worship of one unseen God would threaten their economy, their traditions, and their authority. But Muhammad was not concerned with wealth or tribal pride. He was concerned with truth. He was commanded to purify his own soul, to stand in prayer, and to begin warning those around him. These early revelations focused on the nature of God, the certainty of the afterlife, and the moral accountability of every individual. They called for prayer, charity, and patience. They reminded people of the stories of past prophets who had been rejected by their communities and yet persisted in their missions with faith and resolve. Over time, the number of believers grew, and so did the awareness of the Quraysh. Questions began to circulate. Why was Muhammad speaking so differently now? Why were people around him behaving in new ways, avoiding the idols, refusing to take oaths in their names, and speaking about resurrection and a single God? Rumors turned into concern, and concern turned into suspicion. Still, Muhammad continued to preach in private, inviting those he trusted, and allowing the message to take root slowly but firmly. The strength of the early Muslims did not lie in their numbers or their social influence. Most of them were poor, enslaved, or marginalized, but what united them was faith. They had seen in Muhammad a man who had never lied, who had never exploited others, and who now came with a message that resonated with the deepest truths of their hearts. The Quran spoke to them in a language more powerful than poetry. It did not flatter them, but it awakened something that had long been dormant. It called them to remember their Creator, to treat others with dignity, and to prepare for a day when every soul would be judged with justice and mercy. Muhammad continued to receive revelation, not all at once, but gradually, verse by verse, responding to the circumstances of his life and the needs of his people. Each revelation brought strength, clarity, and direction. The prophet was guided not only in what to say, but in how to live. He was taught patience, wisdom, and gentleness, even in the face of mockery and resistance. He was reminded that he was not alone, that the path he walked had been walked before by Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Though the mission was still in its early stages, and the storm of opposition had not yet fully arrived, the foundation was being laid. A community was forming, bound not by blood or tribe, but by belief. The early Muslims were learning to pray together, to support one another, and to face their challenges with courage. They were building something that would outlast every idol, every stone, and every throne in Mecca. The beginning of the mission was quiet, almost hidden from the world, but it carried within it the power to change everything. It was the planting of a seed in soil that had been dry for too long. And though few yet understood what was taking shape, the roots were already deep, and the first signs of a new dawn had begun to rise. After 3 years of quiet and cautious invitation, Muhammad received a new command that would shift the direction of his mission. Until now, he had delivered the message of Islam in private circles, carefully selecting individuals who showed a sincere heart and a readiness to listen. But now the time had come to speak publicly, to rise and proclaim the truth before a wider audience. The instruction came through revelation, calling him to warn his people openly and to begin delivering the message without fear or secrecy. Muhammad understood the weight of this task. He knew his words would challenge the traditions that had shaped Meccan society for generations. Still, he obeyed without hesitation. One day he climbed the small hill of Mount Safa, a place near the Kaaba where people often gathered to address the community. He stood on the hill and called out to the different clans of Quraysh, naming them one by one. As was customary, when someone made such a public call, people came quickly to listen. They knew Muhammad as a trustworthy man and expected something important. When the crowd had gathered, he asked them a question. If he told them that an enemy was approaching from behind the hills, would they believe him? They answered that they would, for they had never known him to lie. Then he told them that he had come to warn them of something far more serious than a physical attack. He had come to call them to worship one God alone, to abandon their idols, and to prepare for a day when every soul would stand before its Creator. The crowd listened in silence, stunned by the seriousness of his words, but the reaction was swift and divided. Some were confused, others curious, but many were angry. They saw his message not only as a spiritual claim but as an attack on their identity, their heritage, and their livelihood. His own uncle, Abu Lahab, shouted back with scorn and rejected him publicly, setting the tone for the opposition that would follow. The Quraysh could not ignore him any longer. They began to mock and question him, to accuse him of being a madman or a poet, someone inventing stories to gain attention. But even in their criticism, they could not deny the power of his words. The Quran was unlike anything they had heard before. It challenged them, unsettled them, and forced them to consider truths they had long avoided. As Muhammad continued to preach in public, the number of his followers grew slowly. These new Muslims came from all walks of life. Some were young and full of hope. Others were older and had grown tired of the corruption around them. A few were from respected families, but many were from the weaker segments of society. Slaves, the poor, and the socially outcast were among the first to embrace Islam, drawn to its message of equality, justice, and mercy. In a society where a person's worth was measured by tribe, wealth, and status, Islam declared that all human beings were equal before God. This growing movement alarmed the leaders of Quraysh. They saw it as a threat to their authority and their control over the city. They began to pressure Muhammad in subtle and direct ways. Some tried to persuade him with promises of wealth, power, and influence, offering him leadership if only he would stop preaching. Others attempted to humiliate him in public, mocking his message and ridiculing his followers. When words failed, they turned to more brutal tactics. Believers were beaten, imprisoned, and tortured. Families were torn apart. People like Bilal, a slave who had accepted Islam, were dragged through the streets under the hot sun, forced to lie on burning sand and heavy stones placed on their chest in an attempt to make them recant. But the faith of the early Muslims did not waver. Throughout all of this, Muhammad remained firm and patient. He did not retaliate with violence. He continued to deliver the message with compassion, praying for the guidance of those who opposed him and caring for those who stood by his side. His home became a place of comfort for the persecuted. His words gave strength to those who were weak, and his presence, always calm and sincere, reminded his followers that they were part of something greater than themselves. As pressure increased, the leaders of Quraysh turned to Abu Talib, Muhammad's uncle and protector, demanding that he silence his nephew. They warned that if he did not, they would consider him an enemy as well. But Abu Talib, though not a Muslim, loved his nephew dearly and refused to abandon him. He tried to persuade Muhammad to ease his message, to make some compromise, but Muhammad replied that even if they placed the sun in his right hand and the moon in his left, he would never abandon the truth. The public call to Islam marked the beginning of a new phase in the mission. It was no longer a private movement. It had become a force that could not be ignored. It challenged the powerful and uplifted the oppressed. It brought people together across lines of class and tribe. and though it faced rejection, it also planted seeds of change that would one day reshape the entire region. The voice that had once echoed in the cave of Hira now echoed through the streets of Mecca, calling all who would listen to rise and return to the one who had created them. Looking back on the first 40 years of Muhammad's life, before the revelation changed his course and the course of the world, a clear picture begins to form. These early years were not simply a prelude to prophethood, but a preparation for it. Each stage of his life served a purpose in shaping the man who would one day carry the final message to humanity. From the moment he was born, his life was marked by loss, struggle, and quiet resilience. He entered the world as an orphan and walked through it with a heart softened by hardship and a soul strengthened by perseverance. His childhood gave him a deep sensitivity to those who were overlooked. He understood the pain of loneliness, the uncertainty of life without parents, and the comfort that even a small act of kindness could bring. These experiences gave him the ability to see the forgotten and hear the unheard. Later, when he would preach about caring for the orphan and treating the poor with dignity, he spoke not from theory, but from memory. He had lived that life. He had been that child. As he grew, his honesty and trustworthiness became his defining traits. People gave him their goods to protect, sought his help to resolve disputes, and trusted him with matters of great importance. Without ever claiming to be better than others, he rose above the noise of his time simply by living with integrity. Long before any verse of the Quran was revealed, he was already a man shaped by truth. Those who knew him did not expect him to lie, and when he finally shared the message of Islam, even his enemies admitted he had never been known to do so. His marriage to Khadijah added another layer to his character. It gave him emotional security, a partner who believed in him before anyone else did, and a household where love and mutual respect were the foundation. She nurtured his search for meaning and supported him when the world turned away. Through that relationship, he showed how strength and tenderness could live in the same heart. By the time he began receiving revelation, Muhammad had already become a mirror of the message he would deliver. The early verses did not ask him to become someone new. They confirmed who he already was and elevated his mission to reach beyond his own experiences. His early life became a testament to what a human being could be when guided by sincerity, humility, and unwavering moral clarity. The legacy of these early years lives on not only in history books but in the hearts of those who seek to live with purpose and truth. His story before revelation teaches that greatness does not begin with power or miracles. It begins with character, with how one treats others, with what one chooses in moments of silence and solitude. Muhammad's early life is not just the story of a man chosen by God. It is the story of how a life lived with honesty and compassion becomes the perfect vessel for a divine message. The story of Prophet Muhammad's early life is one of depth, patience, and quiet strength. It is a story often overlooked in favor of the dramatic events that followed his first revelation, but these years hold a beauty and importance all their own. They reveal a man who was shaped not by privilege or ease, but by hardship, reflection, and the steady development of character. Long before he stood as a prophet, he stood as an example of integrity, someone whose honesty was never questioned, whose compassion was never in doubt, and whose presence brought peace to those around him. Understanding these years allows us to see the human being behind the mission. He was not a distant figure born into leadership or surrounded by signs of greatness from birth. He was an orphan, a shepherd, a merchant, a husband, and a seeker. He lived among his people, worked with his hands, walked the streets of Mecca, and spent nights alone in thought. His pain was real, his doubts were sincere, and his journey to truth was marked by humility every step of the way. There was no desire for fame, no ambition for power, only a longing to understand the world and his place within it. When revelation finally came, it did not come to someone unprepared. It came to a heart softened by love and loss, to a mind trained by experience and observation, and to a soul already searching for truth. That preparation matters. It shows us that revelation did not create the prophet's greatness, it confirmed it. It shows us that guidance from God often comes to those who have spent their lives seeking to live with purpose and sincerity, even before they know where the path will lead. The legacy of the Prophet's early life is not simply historical. It is a source of inspiration for anyone who wonders how to live with integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. It is a reminder that strength begins with patience, that truth begins with listening, and that the most extraordinary journeys often begin in the most ordinary lives. Before he received the first verse, Muhammad had already become the kind of person who would carry it with grace. His story is not only a light for believers, it is a light for all who long to live with meaning.